Taiwan is in a very dangerous situation, and situations like this, it's always important to recall the words of Henry Kissinger, who famously said that to be an enemy of the United States is dangerous, to be a friend is fatal. And what Kissinger was saying is that America uses its friends, meaning the United States tells other countries, we're with you, we back you, you can depend on us, until that's not true. And Kissinger was referring to countless cases in which the U.S. Was encouraging other political leaders to engage in wars, so that effectively these were proxy wars between the United States and the Soviet Union, or the United States and Russia. And at some point, those wars become devastating to the friend country. And at some point, at least so far, the U.S. has chosen an off-ramp, which leaves the so-called friend or ally stranded in the end. Of course, the sympathy towards that stranded country has to be limited, because usually they have naively depended on the United States that they're going to be protected in some kind of confrontation. So the relevance of that observation for Taiwan is very direct and very strong. If any Taiwanese leader believes the United States can truly protect Taiwan from something that crosses the mainland red line in a real red line, forget it. This is absurd to even think so. And that's why I have said over recent years, look at Ukraine. Look at Ukraine. You could also look at Gaza. You could look at Afghanistan. You could look at almost any of these wars of choice that the United States has been engaged in Syria, in Libya. The list is very, very long. The United States engages in wars because it doesn't listen to other parties. It really just barrels through and claims that all objections are signs of weakness or phony propaganda of the other side, or bluffs. And so the U.S. tends to act extraordinarily arrogantly. It tends to take a client or vassal and build them up and tell them, we're with you, you're great, and you're really important for our security, and we're going to back your security. And then things go very badly in the end. And if one is thinking about a confrontation between the U.S. and China over Taiwan, I think there's every reason, sad to say, to think that such a confrontation would be devastating. Devastating for Taiwan first and foremost, but I would put the U.S. second on the list of devastation. It would not win such a confrontation outright. And third, of course, any confrontation between nuclear powers can be devastating for the whole world, because things get out of control. And when you lose conventionally, there are always voices on the losing side that say we need to escalate all the way, because if we lose conventionally, we lose everything. We lose our stature, we lose our prestige, we lose our alliance. In this case, if it was the U.S. Losing a military confrontation with China thousands of miles away from the U.S. coast, and that's what the war games suggest it could be quite likely, you'd have voices in the United States saying we cannot afford to lose this, because then we would lose Korea, Japan, the Philippines, We'd lose all our alliances in Asia. We'd be kicked out of Asia. The consequences for the U.S. would be completely devastating. We must escalate. And then one is on a path of potentially global destruction. And so this is why you don't cross red lines of other major powers. My own view is the basic principle is to stay out of each other's lanes. I do not recommend that China put a military base in Mexico. It would not go well. I do not believe that China should militarize anywhere in the American neighborhood. No reason for it. I don't think that China would do it for a moment. They have zero interest in it. And similarly, I've never believed that the United States should have military bases in Ukraine or in the South Caucasus or anywhere around China. And for that reason, this is a basic proposition. I've tried in a recent little essay to distinguish two concepts that I think are completely different. There is the concept in international relations of spheres of influence, which are deemed to be, well, depending on who says it, illegitimate claims of authority by a major power over smaller countries in a region. So maybe this China would have claims of a sphere of influence over Southeast Asia, say, or the United States a sphere of influence over the Americas. But there's a different concept that I think is valid, and that is a sphere of security, which is that I do not believe that, or I do believe that the great powers should rightly say to others, don't come to say to the other great powers, especially the other nuclear powers, don't come to our borders to threaten us, harass us, provoke us, divide us. And this is true in the Western Hemisphere. The United States has long claimed this in the Monroe Doctrine, more than 200 years old, to the European great powers, don't bother us in our own neighborhood. And the United States should respect that in other regions. And that way, I think the major nuclear powers can stay out of each other's way, respect each other's red lines, and we can avoid nuclear war, which I take to be the number one quest of diplomacy in this world, that we don't blow ourselves up and we don't take provocations or accidents or failures to heed red lines and thereby end up on an escalatory path that is completely devastating. So this is my basic point, which is prudence. We're in a world of thousands of nuclear weapons. China has expressed red lines in regard to Taiwan that I think are completely understandable historically, and they are China's red lines, and they should be understood, and they should be respected. Peace should also be respected by China. It should be respected by everybody. But the point is that we should avoid a nuclear confrontation or a confrontation between nuclear power giants.
Certainly, Taiwan is under DPP rule at this time. So the stated position by both the President Lai Ching-te as well as other party cadres are pretty much bifurcation. Once on the one side, they would push for Taiwan independent agenda, which means independent from PRC, so moving away from mainland, hopefully with the backstop of Japan and the United States. On the other hand, they are moving extremely to the total dependency of the United States in economic and technological advancement. The best example there is TSMC. So you can see that Taiwan is actually moving in two directions, moving closer to the United States economically and depending on its military support, to the United States, and at the same time use that as a posture to move away from the mainland government, PRC. So with that being in the red line or the core interest of the People's Republic of China, then there is a potential of conflict. Here we're looking at the government paying little attention to the potential of conflict, relying on pretty much the US guarantee or US rhetoric. But at the same time, in terms of economic and trade relations, we're still extremely closely tied to PRC. So with the society at large, you have a very loud voice stated by the DPP government, and you have a lot of quiet, silent objections by all the opposition party and people who do not claim to have any party affiliation. That's one. The second one is, if we look carefully, Jeff mentioned about similarity to the Ukraine war, and I watched the Trump and Netanyahu press conference yesterday in horror. I think the beginning may have some similarity to the Ukrainian situation when US is pushing Ukraine to cross the Russian red line, but the ending of it will be remarkably close to the Israeli-Gaza situation, in which Taiwan will have no say, will not be consulted in the final negotiation because we're independent. We're not a part of any international organization. We do not have formal diplomatic relationship with even the United States. So just like Gaza and their governments weren't consulted before the final 21-point or 20-point peace plan, I think if there were a potential peace and stability threat or potential conflict on Taiwan Straits, if it reached a state of two nuclear superpowers decided to either flex their muscles or engage in the final negotiation, unfortunately, I think Taiwan will probably be the last to be informed, and rather than being a party to a balanced final political solution to the Taiwan situation. Well, a lot of things that you mentioned happened post April 2nd this year. Under the guise of trade negotiation, the current DPP government has not only acquiesced, but also assisted, facilitated the move of Taiwan's high-tech industries to the United States. It is not just TSMC and not just the dollar amount. With the other satellite companies and factories that will be moving alongside with TSMC, we are estimating by the most sort of authoritative magazines that we will have about 200,000 talents moving along with these companies. And that accounts started from 85 companies to about 200 companies to TSMC's US site. So if you think TSMC is a silicon shield for Taiwan, think again, because the silicon shield will be moved away from Taiwan and into Arizona and Texas. So that's number one. The number two is, if you look at what happens in the West Pacific, I'll tag on to what Jeff said earlier. US has very strong military installation previously in Japan, in Korea. Recently in Okinawa, the front islands very close to Taiwan, and then in the Philippines. Philippines just gave US 9 additional military bases. So if you look at the Pacific Deterrence Project, the most notable installations will be in the Philippines. Once again, without Taiwan in the middle, they still managed to build a pearl line of the first island chain. All of this will be consistent with the US strategy of peace through strength. And Jeff just said, you have sphere of influence or sphere of security. These are what China has been doing. Just think about RCEP and think about aerial denial and anti-access. One is on sphere of influence, the other is on sphere of security. It's very clearly delineated the area in which PRC is concerned about and is building a military to support its own security concerns. But US is a expansionary military presence in the West Pacific. Most recently, the Virginia-class nuclear submarine is in the Philippines. Previously, more and more sort of missile guiding installations are in Korea. They're moving the nuclear submarines, Virginia-class, to Australia. So in the United States overall game plan, there will be not only conventional weapons, but also nuclear submarines, most lethal weapons, positioned in the West Pacific. So that would constitute a potential for escalation. So let's go back to our history. Taiwan and China officially started and unfinished a civil war. In 1949, October 1st, exactly today, when PRC established its government, then you will have two different governments across Taiwan Straits. One in Taiwan, that's the ROC, the other in China, in mainland China, which is the PRC. Both claims to be the only representation or legal representation of the entire China. So we are still in a civil war, and that hasn't finished. There was no peace agreement at the end of it. There was no one over the other. So technically, we are still at a civil war, but de facto, we are in peace for the last 66 years. The last time any bomb dropped in any land controlled by the ROC, which is Taiwan's government, is in 1958, the year I was born. So I will never forget that year. 66 years ago, we had the last bomb dropped in Huimei. But since then, we were de facto at war. We are de facto in peace. That's what I mean. Sorry, misspoken. So we are de facto in peace. And why are we all of a sudden in the last 3 years keep talking about the potential war? Don't forget, Taiwan used to have a very strong military presence by the United States. We have a MAG, which is the military advisory group, training all our armies. And then we have a Air Force base in the central part of Taiwan called CCK. We have a large U.S. naval base in the southern part of Taiwan in Zuoying. So Taiwan had an extremely strong U.S. military presence, and U.S. ally trained and cooperated with us. We have strong joint operability that all ceased all of a sudden at the end of 1978. In fact, 1979, January 1st. Taiwan was no longer a U.S. ally. They severed diplomatic relationship. The Taiwan Defense Treaty ended 6 months later, so we no longer have official defense relationship with the United States. So all of these rhetoric about supporting Taiwan, military presence, which is quite a large number in Taiwan, and Taiwan's troop has been sending to U.S. overseas bases and U.S. Mainland bases for training. So that's, happening in recent years and recent months. But with all of these, they can no longer replace the kind of U.S.-Taiwan or U.S.-ROC joint defense treaty relationships before the 1979 severance of the diplomatic tie. So the DPP government may have an illusion that U.S. is supporting Taiwan militarily, and we are increasing our military budget this year by about $1 trillion. But we actually do not have the level of joint operability and the level of support that was our reality that protected Taiwan prior to 1979. There's nothing even close to that. So any illusion of U.S. support of Taiwan, I think is just a very beautiful playbook propagated by the current Washington diplomats as well as State Department personnel and the young and experienced DPP officials just took them all in. They took this bill of goods as a real promise to defend Taiwan.